serious romance under any other motive than to save my own life. And if it were indispensable for me to make the attempt, I should be hung before I finished the first chapter. Your very sincere and very obliged friend, Jane Austen. No, I must keep to my own style and go my own way. 3 or 4 families in the country village is the very thing to work on, getting them into exactly such a spot as would be the light of my life. Emma Woodhouse. Handsome, clever, and rich, had lived nearly 21 years in the world with very little to vex her. She was the daughter of a most indulgent father, and in consequence of her sister's marriage, the mistress of his house from a very early period. Her mother had died long ago, and her place had been supplied by Miss Taylor, an excellent woman as governess, who had fallen little short of a mother in affection. Sorrow came when Miss Taylor married.
Poor Miss Taylor. What a pity it is that Mr. Weston never thought of her.
Mr. Weston is such a good humored man, Papa. And you would not have Miss Taylor live with us forever. Not that she might have a house of her own. We must pay our wedding visit very soon.
Oh, my dear Emma, I could not walk half as far.
Nobody thought of your walking, Papa. We must stay on the couch, to be sure. Ah, but here is Mr. Knightley. It's so kind of you to come at this late hour to call upon us.
Why, you must have found it very damp and dirty. I wish you may not catch a cold.
Dirty, sir. But look at my shoe, not a speck on it.
Well, that is surprising, for we've had a vast deal of rain here. I wanted them to put off the wedding. Poor Miss Taylor. Tis a sad business.
Poor Mr. and Miss Woodhouse, perhaps, but I cannot say poor Miss Taylor. It must be better for the new Mrs. Weston to only have one to please than 2.
Especially when one of those 2 is such a fanciful, troublesome creature. And that is what you would say if my father-in-law's wife.
It is very true, my dear. I am sometimes very fanciful and troublesome.
My dearest Papa, I meant only myself. Miss Knightley loves to find fault with me. You know, in a joke. It is all a joke. We always said we liked one another.
Emma knows I never flattered her, but I meant no reflection on her. Mrs. Weston used to have 2 persons at least. She will now have but 1. But what of Mr. Weston's son? Has he got any on this occasion?
Mr. Frank Weston Churchill has not been with us. There was a strong expectation of his coming, but it ended in nothing. I am persuaded that Mr. and Mrs. Weston think Frank Churchill is the very person to suit him, and so I have a great curiosity to see him. His arrival, I fear, depends entirely upon his aunt's temper.
Ah, yes, the great Mrs. Churchill.
Everybody knows Mrs. Churchill. She is so very unreasonable. Everything is done to her wishes. She has given her nephew a superior name and promised her fortune, but has kept him from his father's wedding.
I hope in spite of that it went tolerably well. How did you all behave? We cried in it.
We all behaved charmingly, with hardly a tear to be seen.
Dear Emma bears everything so well, Mr. Knightley, but she really is very sorry to lose poor Miss Taylor.
You have forgotten the matter of joy to me, that I made the match myself.
You did the match?
I did, 4 years ago. And to be proved right, when so many said Mr. Weston would never marry again, they comforted me for anything.
You made a lucky match. You had it all out for yourself.
Dear Emma never thinks of herself, what she can do good to others. But pray not make any more matches, my dear, for they break up one's family circle grievously.
I promise to make none for myself, Papa, that I must indeed make one more. For Miss Elton, he has been rector here a whole year, and has fitted up his house so comfortably that it would be a shame having a single any longer.
Invite him to dinner, and help him to the best of the fish and the chicken. But leave him to choose his own wife.
Oh, Miss Martin, Miss Smith, only that's not happening to me. How very odd.
I did not think you ever walked this way.
Harriet Smith was the natural daughter of somebody. Somebody had placed her several years back at Mrs. Gordon's school, and somebody had lately raised her from scholar to boarder. Emma found Harriet altogether very engaging. She decided to notice Harriet Mrs. Weston, there was nothing more to be done. For Harriet, everything.
What do you think of Mr. Martin?
I got him very plain, I suppose, but
Not now. He is remarkably plain, Harriet. But that is nothing compared with his entire want of gentility.
be sure, he's not so genteel as a real gentleman. He's not like Mr. Knightley.
Miss Farr, you have been visiting. Mr. Martin rents it with Mr. Knightley, does he not?
Oh, yes. He and his mother have 2 parlours. It's 8 pounds. One of them a very pretty little old cow. As I was so fond of it, she said it ought to be called my cow. And Mr. Martin with 3 miles round one day to bring me walnuts. But have you ever seen him? He has passed you very often.
A young farmer is the very last sort of person to raise my curiosities. A degree or 2 lower might interest me. I might hope to be useful to the family in some way. But a farmer can need none of my help. He is as much above my notice as he is below it. What do you imagine his age to be?
He was 24 the 8th of last June.
That is far for him to settle. 6 years from now, he can be a good sort of woman in the same rank as his own.
6 years? Dear Miss Woodhouse, you'll be 30 years old.
That is as early as most men can afford to marry, who are not born to independence.
But they live very comfortably.
I have no doubt that he thrive, Harriet, but it does not follow that we should marry anybody that we need to notice. And the misfortune of your birth ought to make you particularly careful. Make me no doubt of you being a gentleman's daughter, and you must support your claim to that station by everything within your power. I want to see you eminently well connected. Mr. Elton is the very person to drive that young farmer out of Harriet's head. He already thinks it beautiful, and any girl who could be gratified answer it, of course, and speedily.
What shall I say?
Oh no, the response must be your own. Expressions of gratitude and concern for the pain you are inflicting will present themselves unbidden to your mind, I'm sure.
You think I ought to refuse him then?
This is a point with which you have settled your own feelings. However, I let it down as a general rule that if a woman doubts as to whether she should accept a man or not, she certainly ought to refuse him. Marriage is not a state to be entered into with half a heart.
It would be safer to say no. You think I had better say no?
Not for the world would I advise you either way. If you prefer Mr. Martin to every other person you've ever been in company with, why should you hesitate? You blush, Harriet. Does anyone else come to you this moment? I fancy that you and I are the only people to whom the attentions of a certain person, his looks and his manners, have explained themselves. And a woman is not to marry a man merely because he can write a tolerable letter.
That is true. And it is but a short letter too. I hope you will not mind so very much.
Let us think of those among our absent friends who are more cheerfully employed. At this moment, perhaps, Mr. Elton has shown your picture to his mother and sisters.
But he has left my picture in Bond Street to be framed.
No, my modest little Harriet. It is his companion all this evening. His soul, his delight. It opens his designs on Mother's family and introduces you to them. How busy, how cheerful their imaginations all are.
Harriet slept at Hartfield that night. For several weeks past, she'd been spending more than half her time there, gradually getting a room appropriated to herself. Emma judged it best, in every respect, that they keep her with them as much as possible.
I have reason to think that Harriet Smith is going to have an offer of marriage. Robert Martin can be down laughing to the girl he's talking about. I was very much pleased with all that he said.
He wrote yesterday, and both refused.
Refused. Then Harriet Smith is great sympathy than I believe. I hope you are mistaken.
I saw her answer. Nothing could be clearer.
You saw her answer? You wrote her answer to her, which is your reading.
Robert Martin is a very respectable young man, but I do not admit him to be Harriet's equal.
Your infatuation binds you. What are Harriet Smith's claims for any connection higher than Robert Martin? She's the natural daughter of noblemen of Smith. She's not a sensible girl. She's been taught nothing useful. She's pretty and good tempered, and that is all.
I'm very much mistaken if your sex in general will not think beauty and good temper the highest claims a woman can possess.
Upon my word, better to be without sense than misapplied as you do. You make no secret of your matching. But Elton is the man who will labor in vain. Elton knows the value of good income as well as anyone. He may talk sentimentally, but he will act rationally.
I have done nothing with which a woman's friendship and feelings cannot justify. And Miss Elton has gone to London with Harriet's picture, though it was his club night, which he's never been noticed before. Dr. Perry told him how shabby it was in him, their best player, to absent himself, and Mr. Elton said in a very particular way that he was going on business which he would not put off for any inducement in the world.
The picture of Harriet, elegantly framed, came safely to hand soon after Mr. Elton's return, and he sighed out his admiration just as he ought. As for Harriet's feelings, they were visibly forming themselves into as strong an attachment as her youth and sort of mind could manage. A youth Emma sought to improve further by useful reading. Unfortunately, the only literary pursuit which
that is court. Another view of man, my second prince, behold him there, monarch of the sea. That is ship, now for the sea. But united, what will verse we bring? Man's boasted power and freedom are all flattering. Lord of the earth and sea, he bends a slave, and women, lovely women, reign alone. Court, ship, Harriet. Court, ship, courtship. Oh, Miss Woodhouse! I congratulate you, my dear Harriet, with all of my heart. Miss Woodhouse, whatever you say is always correct, and therefore I suppose it must be, but otherwise I could not have imagined it. Your marrying will be equal to the marriage of Miss Weston and my dear Miss Taylor. There does seem to be something in the air of Hartley which gives love exactly the right direction. Oh, yes. I do wonder, Miss Woodhouse, that you may not be married, charming as you are. My being charming is not quite enough to induce me to marry. I must find other people charming. One of the pair celebrities. If I were to marry, I must respect your heritage. Dear me, it is so odd to hear women talk so. Few women are half as much mistress of their husbands' houses as I am here. But never did I expect to be so beloved and important, so always first, and always right, in everyone's eyes as I am my father's. But then, to be an old maid, at last like Miss Bates. If I ever thought that I should be like Miss Bates, I would marry tomorrow. A single woman of a very narrow income must be a ridiculous old maid, though a single woman of good fortune is always respectable. But come, I returned on a little visit to pay to a poor sick family who live in a dwelling at Harlequins. Our road is down to Vicarage Lane, passing above our blessed Miss Elton. There you go, and your riddle before one of these days.
Mr. Elton must now be left to himself. It was no longer in Emma's power to quicken his measures. The Colonel Elizabeth is family from London came with prime object of interest. John, Isabella Knightley, and their 5 children arrived safely, and Mr. Knightley was immediately invited to Hartfield to greet his brother and sister-in-law. Emma hoped that she and Mr. Knightley might become friends again after the late screams of Harriet, and it might rather assist the restoration of this friendship that when Mr. Knightley walked into the room, Emma had one of Isabella's children with her, the youngest, a little girl.
What a comfort it is that we think alike about our nephews and nieces. As for man and woman, our opinions are sometimes very different. But with regard to these children, I observe you never disagree.
If you were as little under the power of fancy, as you with men and women, as you are with these children are concerned, you might always think alike.
To be sure, our discordancy must always arise from my doing me wrong.
For good reason. I was 16 years old when you were born.
And no doubt you were much more superior in judgment at that period of our lives. But is not the lapse of 1 in 20 years for your understanding clearer?
Yes, a good deal.
But not near enough to me a chance of being right, if you think differently.
I have some advantage of you by 16 years' experience, and by not being a pretty young woman and a spoiled child. Come, my dear, let us be friends and say no more about it. Tell your aunt, little Nana, that she ought to set a better example than reuniting of Regency, and that she was not born before she is now.
Very true. Little Emma, grow up to be a much better woman than your aunt. Be infinitely more clever, and not half so conceited.
There could hardly be a happier creature than Isabella Knightley, going about amongst old acquaintances with all of the children. At Christmas, Mr. Weston would take no denial. They were to all dine at Randall's. But the evening before this great event, Harriet went home with a cold. Emma called on her the next day, and, finding her feverish with a bad sore throat, raised her spirit by representing how Mr. Elton would be depressed when he knew his state, and how they should all miss her at Randall's. But that fine evening ended abruptly with a snow. The carriage was awful, and Emma found, upon being escorted into the second carriage by Mr. Elton, that they would have a tete-a-tete drive.
the admirer of my friend, not being aware of the very great inequality in which you are so acceptable. As for myself, I have no satisfaction in this question. Oh, we were right upon it. Please be right. How could I have been so deceived? And such a blow to Harriet, that is worst of all. Certainly, I often thought his manners towards me unnecessarily gallant, but I never for an instant suspected it to mean anything but grateful respect to me as Harriet's friend. Oh, and I had been persuaded, if not allowing her to marry young Robert Martin. And I was quite right, but there I should have stopped and left the rest to Tom Charles.
John and Isabella would not stay long at Hartfield. The weather soon improved, and Mr. Woodhouse was obliged to see the party off. That very evening brought a ceremonious note from Mr. Elton that he was leaving Highbury on his way to Bath to spend a few weeks. Emma resolved to keep Harriet no longer in the dark, and went to seek her again at Mrs. Gordon's.
Miss Woodhouse, you are feeling better, I hope, Harriet.
Yes, thank you. I'm very nearly recovered from my cold.
Good. For I hope you will soon get the better of your other complaint as well.
My other complaint?
Oh, Harriet, it is always a thing to admit that for the last 6 weeks I have been grossly mistaken in all my ideas on this one subject. Mr. Elton has proven himself the very reverse of what I believed in. Proud, assuming, and little concerned with the feelings of others.
Miss Woodhouse, whatever do you mean?
Oh, Harriet, I've talked him into being very much attached to this man, and now I must appear in the ungracious character of the one preferred.
The one preferred? Oh, Miss Woodhouse.
I think I shall never be in charge of myself again.
You must not blame yourself on my account, Miss Woodhouse. For I blame nobody. The affection of a man as great as Mr. Elton would have been too great to distinction. Nobody but so kind and partial a friend as you would have thought it possible.
My dear Harriet, all that is amiable is on your side, not my own. In future, I resolve to be more humble and discreet, and to repress imagination all the rest of my life.
With Mr. Elton away, conversation at Highbury again changed the whereabouts of the mysterious Frank Churchill, who had not yet paid his respects to his father's bride. Emma was not, at this time, in a state of spirits to care really, except as a disappointment to the Westons. Still, as it was desirable she appear her usual self, she expressed interest in the circumstance.
The Churchills are very likely at school, but I dare say he can't be worried.
His aunt and uncle will not spare him.
When Frank Churchill wanted to see his father, he was contrived. We hear of him forever some water into his water. A little while ago he was a grainer. This proves that he can leave the Churchill.
Yes, sometimes he can.
And those times when I didn't think it was worth his while.
It is very unfair to judge anybody's conduct without an intimate knowledge of their situation. We ought to be acquainted with Mrs. Churchill's temper before we can pretend to decide upon him who never can do.
There is one thing that a man can only do for duty, and that is his duty. It is Frank Churchill's duty to pay attention to his father.
I wish I could try to understand, but an amiable young man must be likely to fear an opposing marriage whom he has been looking up to all his life.
Your amiable young man is a very weak young man.
I have not the least idea of his being a weak young man. I feel certain that he is not. He seems determined to think ill of him.
Me? Not at all. I should be ready to acknowledge his merits, but I hear of him, except that he's good-looking and smooth, plausible manner.
Then he will be a treasure at Highbury. We do not often look upon fine young men, well-bred and agreeable. We shall think and speak of no one else.
A new topic of conversation was, in Emma's opinion, sorely needed. Lately she and Harriet had talked quite enough of Mr. Elton. She could not determine whether Harriet's solace of her own sins required more, so she determined one morning to call on Mrs. and Miss Bates and seek safety in numbers.
You will take my seat by the fire, Miss Woodhouse. It is ever so much cozier. Oh, thank you, Mrs. Bates. I will be fine her directly, and I immediately said, "You received a letter from Jane this morning. I don't think I ever saw anybody more surprised."
I hope Miss Fairfax is well.
Thank you. Oh, here's the letter. I was reading it against my mother. Such a perfect her. "A letter from Jane!" But I cannot hear it quite often enough. And I really must apologize for Jane writing such a short letter. "Only 2 pages, you see?" In general, she fills the whole page and crosses half. My mother often says when the letter is supposed to go written, "Well, Hetty, now I think we put on to you to make up all the checker work." Don't you, ma'am?
I have no doubts as to the excellence of Miss Fairfax handwriting.
You are extremely kind. Ma'am, do you hear? Miss Woodhouse said she has no doubt as to the excellence of our dear Jane's handwriting. However, my mother's deafness is trifling, you see, just nothing at all. But by only raising my voice and saying anything 2 or 3 times over, she's sure to hear. Jane will not find her grammar mark all deaf as she was 2 years ago. But it has been 2 years, you know, since Jane was here.
Are you expecting Miss Fairfax soon?
Next week, she's with us 3 months at least, for the Campbells going to Ireland. Our niece Jane is an orphan, you see. Colonel Campbell, a friend of her father, took pity on her, and she became a guest in his home, her favourite with his daughter, Miss Campbell. Colonel Campbell undertook the whole charge of Jane's education. She's been brought up for educating others, the very few times she inherited being independent as possible. Miss Campbell, now Mrs. Dixon, of course, has persuaded her father and mother to come over to Ireland directly. Until she married last October, she's not been away from them for so much as a week. Jane has had a great deal of Ireland with Mr. Dixon. A beautiful place, I fancy. He's quite longing to go.
But despite her friend's urgency and her own wishes in Ireland, Miss Fairfax prefers to go in the time to you and Miss Bates.
Yes, entirely the choice. Colonel Mrs. Campbell thinks she's quite right to do so. Indeed, they particularly wish for her to try her maid there, as she's not been feeling as well as usual lately, once Miss Campbell's married.
I'm concerned to hear it.
You are kind to say so. Well, let's turn to Jane's letter. I'm sure she tells her own story a great deal better than I can, for
I'm afraid we must wish you good morning, Miss Bates. My father will be expecting us.
oh dear! Well, it is always a pleasure to see you, Miss Woodhouse and Miss Smith.
Good morning, Miss Bates. Mrs. Bates!
Well, we have heard the whole substance of Jane Fairfax's letter, but managed to escape the letter itself.
You know Miss Bates' niece?
We are always forced to be acquainted whenever she returns to Highbury, because we're the same age. Heaven forbid that I should ever bore anybody half as much about all my nieces and nephews together as Miss Bates does about Jane Fairfax.
Why Emma did not like Jane Fairfax might be a difficult question to answer. Because it is like so unjust that she never saw Jane Fairfax, and after any period of considerable absence, without feeling as though she'd wronged her in any way, determined that she would dislike her no longer. These were charming sentiments, but not lasting.
Colonel and Mrs. Campbell are well, I hope.
Quite well, thank you.
And Mr. and Mrs. Dixon?
Also well?
And Miss Bates tells me Mr. Dixon is an amiable young man.
Yes!
So you find the match quite suitable?
The Campbells are very well pleased.
Still, their daughter is so far from them, in Ireland.
That is true, but it is lovely, I have been told.
And yet, you chose not to accompany the Colonel Sophomore there.
Yes. Did you hear, Miss Woodhouse, that our dear Jane and Mr. Frank Churchill were away now at the same time?
Oh, and was he handsome?
I believe he was reckoned a very fine young man.
Yes.
Yes.
Miss Fairfax, shall we play this once more?
Oh yes, Jane plays so beautifully.
You must forgive her. She's so cold, so cautious. That's the clerk of politeness. She's disgustingly, suspiciously reserved.
And glad you Miss Fairfax waiting. Probably no Campbell share her grandmother. It must have been a real result.
I hope I'm not often deficient in what is due to guess a half you.
No, you are not often deficient, either in manner or comprehension.
Miss Fairfax is reserved.
I always thought she was. But we must have her comfort. Mind you, you were not going to tell me, I hope, that you were not supposed to be here.
Oh no, I was very pleased with my own perseverance in asking questions, and amused to think of how little information I obtained.
I am disappointed. What was like if Jane Fairfax was quite unreasonable? Could it be that you see in her the little accomplishment when you want to regard yourself?
She's elegant. I've never denied it.
But confess, Emma, there are moments in which your conscience cannot feel it pretty.
Well, I hope everybody is having a pleasant evening. I am. I quite like old friends.
Have you heard the news, Mr. Woodhouse? Mr. Elton is to be married. Miss Hawkins, that's all I know. Miss Hawkins is back. Mr. Elton?
Young people are in such a hurry to marry these days, and to marry strangers too.
A new name of us all. It is such a happiness when good people get together. But I believe you must be running away. The weather does not look well. Jane, you are tired, and I will not have you out in the shower. Mr. Knightley, you are too kind. Miss Hawkins and Mr. Elton. A real piece of news indeed. A welcome piece of news. Proving that Mr. Elton cannot have suffered long. He has only been gone 4 weeks. I am sorry for Harriet, though. Harriet must feel it.
Oh, Miss Woodhouse, what do you think has happened? I had just set off for Mrs. Goddard when it began to rain, so I ran on directly into a sheltered old shop. And who should come in but Elizabeth Martin and her brother!
Robert Martin.
My mother should have fainted. He spoke, and I answered. And then I took courage and said I must go. But he came after me, only to say if I was going to Hartfield, I had much better go round by Dr. Harry's stables, for I should find a new way quite flooded by this rain. So I said I was very much obliged to him. You know I could not do less. And then I came round. I believe I did, as I hardly knew. Oh, Miss Woodhouse, do talk to me and make me feel comfortable again.
Calm yourself, Harriet. It is a mere trifle and not worthy of dwelt upon. You seem to have behaved extremely well, and it is over.
That is true. I will not think of it. But there was some sort of satisfaction in seeing him behave so kindly.
Put Mr. Martin out of your mind, Harriet. There is other news. Mr. Elton is to be married to Miss Hawkins of Bath.
Oh dear.
A measure of relief from this blow soon provided. The French treasure, so long talked of, finally arrived. It was presented to Mr. Woodhouse and Emma by an exalted Mr. Weston. Emma did not think too much of him said in the young man's praise.
I was always glad we did not come at Christmas. Now we're going to have just the right weather for him. Fine, dry, settled weather. We shall enjoy him completely.
Why, I cannot believe he is already 3 and 20. He was but 2 years old when he lost his poor mother and went to live with his uncle now. Well, time does fly, and that memory is very bad.
And how do you find the groundless, Mr. Churchill? I'm very much pleased with it, and my father's marriage has been the wisest measure. I was prepared for agreeable manners in Mrs. Weston, but I did not know I was to find a pretty young woman as well.
You cannot find too much perfection in Mrs. Weston, from our feelings. But do not let her imagine that you spoke of her as a pretty young woman.
Depend upon it. I understand whom I might praise without any danger of being thought extravagant in my terms.
Well, I have business at the Crown, but I do not encourage anybody else.
As you are going further, sir, I will take the opportunity of paying a visit. I have the honor of being acquainted with a neighbour of yours, a family by the name of Fairfax, or I should rather say Barnes or Bates. Do you know any family of that name?
To be sure we do. True, you are acquainted with Miss Fairfax.
I knew her at Weymouth.
And a fine girl she is. Call upon her by all means. She is a very elegant young woman.
Yes.
If you were never particularly struck by her manners before, I think you will be today. You will see and hear her to advantage. No, I'm afraid you will not hear her at all. For she is an aunt who never holds her tongue.
Oh, well, there is no necessity for my calling this morning. Another day will do.
If you do not call early, it will be a slight.
Come, I shall show you the way.
He has much of his father's spirit and liveliness. I thought immediately that I should like him. doubt as to what Mr. Weston was often thinking about, and detected his quick eye glancing toward us with a happy expression.
The following day got Frank Churchill again. He was interested in the Crown Inn, an inconsiderable house, except for the fact that a large room had been visibly added many years ago for a ballroom. He lamented that its original purpose should have ceased, and that they ought to have balls there every fortnight through the winter. He argued like a young man very much bent on dancing. At last, he was persuaded to move on.
She paid our visit to the Bateses in Miss Fairfax yesterday.
Oh, yes, and felt very much obliged to you for your preparatory hint. If the talking aunt had taken me quite by surprise, it must have been the death of me.
And how did you think Miss Fairfax looked?
Ill, very ill. And Miss Fairfax is naturally so pale as almost always to give the appearance of ill health.
Not at all. There was a delicacy to her complexion, to a peculiar elegance to her face.
I have heard people say so, but for me, nothing can recommend for the want of a fine glow of health.
Well, there's no disputing that taste. Did you see Miss Fairfax often in Weymouth?
It is always the lady's right to decide on the degree of acquaintance.
Upon my word, you answer as discreetly as she could herself. She is so very unwilling to give the least information about anybody that I really think you may say what you like of your acquaintance with her.
And may I indeed? I met her frequently at Weymouth. Colonel Campbell was a very agreeable man, and Mrs. Campbell a friendly, warm-hearted woman. I like them all.
You are aware of Miss Fairfax's situation in life, I conclude, that she is destined to care of others' children.
And yes, I believe I do. And did you ever hear her play?
Forget how much she belongs to Harvard. I have heard her every year since we both began. She plays charmingly.
And you think so, do you? I am excessively fond of music, and must possess the smallest skill in judging anybody performance. I remember one thing of her being thought to play well. A man, a very musical man, engaged to another woman, would never have that other woman sit down to the instrument if Miss Fairfax could sit down instead.
Mr. Dixon is very musical, is he? I would not excuse a man having a more acute sensibility to fine sounds than to my feelings. How did Miss Campbell utilize it?
And Miss Fairfax was Miss Campbell's particular friend, you know.
Oh, poor comfort.
It is impossible for me to say on what terms they really were. But you have known Miss Fairfax from a child, and you must be a better judge of her character than I can be.
It is natural to suppose that we should be taken to each other, but we never did. Her reserve.
A most repulsive quality indeed. One cannot love a reserved person.
Emma's good opinion of Frank Churchill was a little shaken the following day by hearing that he was gone up to London merely to have his hair cut. But, despite this unfortunate fancy, there was nothing to denote him unworthy of the distinguished honour which Emma's imagination had given him, the honour of being marked out for her by all of their joint acquaintances. Only one spirit among them was not to be softened by Frank Churchill's bows and smiles, Mr. Knightley. When the circumstances of the haircut were told, Emma heard him say to himself,
Just the trifling silly young fellow I'm looking for.
with Tuesday came the agreeable prospect of seeing Frank Churchill again. An invitation arrived from Mr. and Mrs. Weston. The top was all of a pianoforte.
I called on Miss Bates this afternoon. As soon as I entered the room, I was struck by the sight of it. A very elegant looking instrument indeed. It had arrived from London the day before, and highly unexpected.
It must be from Colonel and Mrs. Campbell.
Most likely, of course, but Jane had a letter from them very lately, and not a word was said about it. Why do you smile?
Nay, what are you?
Me? I suppose I smile for pleasure. At Colonel Campbell's been so rich and so liberal. It is a handsome present.
Very.
I rather wonder why he has not been here before.
Perhaps Miss Fairfax has never stayed here so long before.
Perhaps. But what of Mr. Dixon? We were speaking the other day, you know, of his being so warmly admired for performance. I cannot help but suspecting that after making his proposals to her friend, Miss Campbell, he had the misfortune to fall in love with her. I'm sure there must be a particular cause for her choosing to come to Highfield instead of accompanying the Count's to Ireland. and the arrival of this pianoforte is decisive. I may not have convinced you entirely, perhaps, but I'm perfectly convinced myself that Mr. Dixon is a principal in the business.
Indeed, it is an easy supposing I'm convinced. I can see it in no other light than as an offering of love. Miss Fairfax, welcome, dear friend. We talk of nothing here but the new pianoforte.
Have you walked all this way? Wouldn't you nicer now? I cannot bear to think of it. You shall have our courage to take you home again.
You are too kind, Mrs. West, but there is no need to trouble yourself about us.
Ah, Miss Smith, welcome to Randall's, my dear.
Good evening, Mr. Rustin. Ah, here is my special little friend, Miss Smith. What do you think of her?
Miss Smith? Oh, yes. I must say, I never have seen so lovely a face.
What is the matter?
Miss Fairfax has done her hair in so very odd a way that I cannot keep my eyes from her. Those curls! I must go and ask her whether it is an Irish fashion. Shall I?
No!
I will. And we shall see how she takes it.
Ah, Harriet. So, you have seen our Mr. Churchill. Do you not think him handsome?
Very handsome, Miss Woodhouse. To be sure, it is paying him too great compliments, but I do believe he resembles Mr. Elton a little.
Oh, Harriet. My dear Emma, do you know how Miss Bates and the niece came here? They what? How else did they come? They have no carriage. Very true. And after the use of our own, but Mr. Knightley had brought them and was to take them home again. So thoughtful attention. Mr. Knightley is not a gallant man, but a very humane one. You give him credit for more simple benevolence than I do. For while Miss Bates and I were speaking, a suspicion died in his mind, and I've not been able to get it out again. In short, I made love between Mr. Knightley and Jane Fairfax. My dear Miss Weston, how did I think such a thing? And Mr. Knightley was not to marry. Why ever not? Well, I have never had such an idea before, and not at all now. And Jane Fairfax too, of all her age. She's always been a favourite of him, as you very well know. But Mr. Knightley does not want to know. He is happy by himself, his farm, his library, and all the parish to know. And how can you bear to have Miss Bates haunting Donwell Abbey, begging him all day long for his 3 times a year Jane? For shame, Emma, do not mimic her. Upon my word, I do not think Mr. Knightley would be much disturbed in Miss Bates. Little things do not irritate him. But the question is not whether it be a bad connection, but whether he wishes it, and I think he does. The interest he takes in Jane Fairfax, in such an admirable performance of the pianoforte, might
shown Mr. Highbury, I must be on my guard not to encourage his affections, but my mind is quite made up to never marry. I shall do very well again, after a little while, and that will be a good thing, I think, for they say everybody's in love once in their lives, and I shall think it off easily.
When Frank Churchill's letter to Mrs. Weston arrived, Emma had the perusal of it. Miss Woodhouse appeared on its pages more than once, and never without a pleasant connection. Still, Emma found that she could do without the reader, and that he must learn to do without her. Her resolution of refusal grew more interesting by the addition of speed for his consolation and happiness. Compressed into the very lowest vacant corner of the letter were these words:
I am not a spare moment on Tuesday, as you know, for Miss Woodhouse's beautiful little friend. Pray make my excuse and adieu for her. Might it be possible? He was very much struck by the loveliness of her face and her carriage. It would be advantageous indeed.
It was well to have a comfort in store on Harriet's behalf, for even in that quarter was at hand. Mr. Elton's wedding day was named. He would soon be among them again, he and his bride.
Very like Maple Grove indeed. I'm quite struck by the likeness. Mr. E, isn't it astonishingly like?
Indeed it is, my love.
And not merely the house, the grounds. My brother, Mr. Suckling, will be enchanted with this place. People who have extensive grounds themselves are always pleased with anything in the same style. When you've seen all this county, I'm afraid you will think you prefer it to Northfield. Surrey is full of beauties. Oh, yes, Surrey is the garden of England. Many counties, I believe, are called the garden of England. No, no, I've never heard any but Surrey called it. My brother, Mr. Suckling, has promised us a visit in the spring, and that will be our time for exploring. He will have his barouche landau, which holds 4 perfectly, and we should be able to explore the different beauties extremely well. You have many parties of that kind here, I suppose, Miss Woodhouse. No, we are a very quiet set of people, more disposed to stay at home. Your father's state of health must be a great drawback. Let me recommend Bath to you. My father has been there more than once, without receiving any benefit. Ah, that's a great pity, for I assure you, Miss Woodhouse, where the waters do agree, it is quite wonderful the relief they give, and it would be a charming introduction for you, who have lived so secluded a life. A line from me would bring you a little host of acquaintances. Thank you, Mrs. Elton, but our going to Bath is quite out of the question. No, Kate. We have been calling at Randall's. Mr. Weston seems an excellent creature, and she appears so truly good. She was your governess, I think. Having understood as much, I was rather astonished to find her so very ladylike. And who do you think came in while we were there? Knightley himself! Knightley is quite the gentleman. I like him very much, and I quite rave about Jane Fairfax. We must endeavour to do something for her, Miss Woodhouse. She is in such obscurity, so thrown away. My resolution is taken. I shall have Jane Fairfax very often at my house. Shall introduce her whenever I can, and shall be constantly on the watch for an eligible situation. But come, Mr. E, we must be off. Good day, Miss Woodhouse. Mr. Woodhouse, good day. A little quickness of voice there, which rather hurts the ear. But I do not like strange voices. Well, Miss Woodhouse, what do you think of her? I am not at all surprised you should have fallen in love. I think of how beautiful. Very nicely dressed, indeed. Remarkably elegant gown. I wish them happy with all my heart, and no, I do not think I shall mind seeing them again. He is still as superior as ever, but being married, you know, it is quite a different thing. She does seem a charming young woman, and just what he deserves. Knightly. Never seen before, is a man and calls him Knightly, and discovers that he is a gentleman. I doubt whether he will return the compliment and discover her to be a lady. And Mrs. Weston, astonished that the person who brought me up should be a gentlewoman. Absolutely insufferable. Worse than I imagined. I Miss Fairfax quits before we condemn her to what she goes to. Her aunt is a good creature, but as a constant companion must be very tiresome.
You are right, Mrs. Weston. Miss Fairfax receives attention from Mrs. Elton, which nobody else pays her.
I know how highly you think of Jane Fairfax.
Yes, anybody can have a fine out of her.
The extent of the admiration may take a by surprise from her.
Oh, are you there? Miss Fairfax, I dare say, would not have me find to answer. And I'm certain I shall never ask her.
You are not vain, Mr. Knightley. That I will say.
Are you settling that I should marry Jane Fairfax?
No, I'm not. You've scolded me too much for matchmaking for me to presume to take such a to you.
Upon my word, I have not the smallest wish for your marrying Jane Fairfax. Or Jane anybody. You are not to come and sit with us in this comfortable room you have known.
Jane Fairfax is a very charming woman, but she has not the open temper like a man of this form. I do not accuse her of want of feeling, but she's reserved. More reserved, I think, than she used to be. My mother knows her temper.
Well, Mrs. Weston, what do you say now to Mr. Knightley marrying Jane Fairfax?
I say that he's so much occupied by the idea of knocking him up there that I should not wonder if it and to see so at last.
The greater part of Mrs. Elton's new acquaintance, taking it for granted that the bride must be as clever and agreeable as she professed herself, was well satisfied with her. Invitations to dine flowed in. Emma must not do less than the others. The persons to be invited required little thought. Mr. Woodhouse considered 8 at dinner the utmost his nerves could bear. Harriet begged to be excused, and Jane Fairfax was invited in her stead.
What a life I am to lead among you! Upon my word, it shall be absolutely dissipated. From Monday next to Saturday, we have not a disengaged day. My dear Jane, what is this I hear of your traipsing about all morning, in the rain?
I went only to the post office. I always get letters when I'm here. A walk before breakfast does me good.
In the rain! Oh, do not tell me!
I assure you, Mrs. Elton, it has done me no harm.
You shall not do such a thing again. The man who fetches our letters every morning shall inquire for yours and bring them to you.
You are extremely kind, but I cannot give up my walk.
My dear Jane, say no more about it. The thing is decided. Such solicitude about fetching her own letters. I wonder if the way walk this morning produced any. It is a glow of complexion and spirit. I get quite anxious about you, my dear. Have you really heard of nothing?
I have not even made any inquiry. I do not wish to make any guess.
Oh, my dear, we cannot begin too early. You do not know how many candidates there always are for the first situations. A cousin of Mr. Sophomore, Mrs. Brown, had such an infinity of applications. Everybody was anxious to be in her family before she moved in the first circle. Wax candles in the storeroom.
I would not wish you to make any inquiries at present.
My dear Jane, we must begin directly.
Excuse me, ma'am, but this is by no means my intention.
Mr. Weston, back from London already. I bring news. A letter from Frank. Read it, my dear. Read it to Emma. He's returning to Hartley. I always told you he would be here again soon, did I not? The Churchills will be in London next week at the latest. As to Mrs. Churchill's illness, or nothing of course, but they are still coming on her account. She thinks Escombe is too cold, so they're all to move south here. I hope I shall soon have the pleasure of introducing you to my son, Mrs. Elton. Ah, yes, and I shall be very happy in his acquaintance. What can I attribute this rather considerable agitation upon hearing this news of Frank Churchill? I must go in my room.
My own attachment has really subsided into a mere nothing. It is not worth thinking of. But if he, who has undoubtedly been the most in love, were to be returning with the same want of sentiment, it would be very distressing.
I do not wish to have my affections entangled again.
It is incumbent on me to avoid any encouragement of his.
It was a clear thing upon Frank Churchill's arrival that he too was less in love than he had been. But he was not without agitation. That Mrs. Churchill really was very ill, and very certain he could not be prevailed upon by all of his father's doubt to say that her complaints were merely imaginary. It soon appeared that London was
It is charming. And how do you like my gown? Nobody can think less of dress than I do. But upon such an occasion where everybody's eyes are upon me, I would not wish to be inferior to others. And I see very few girls in this room except mine. Frank Churchill is a capital dancer, I understand. We shall see if our styles suit.
And how do you like Mrs. Elton?
Not at all.
She will be able to ask her for the first dance.
But I came on board on us to me. Where is my father? When are we to begin dancing? Ah, at last.
You do not dance, Mr. Elton.
Most readily. If you will dance with me, Mrs. Weston. Me? I am no dancer.
But this young lady is engaged.
Miss Smith? Miss Smith? Oh, I hadn't observed. Well, I'm not an old married man. My dancing days are over. You'll excuse me? Ah, I see you were just made to dance with flowers tonight.
Not in the least. Miss Smith, would you give me the honor?
Oh, thank you, sir.
Knightley has taken pity on poor little Miss Smith. Very good natured, I declare. Jane, on the shoulder of the rocks, you must. Yes, I know. Mr. Churchill, you are too obliging.
Mr. Elton's conduct and Mrs. Elton's looks, they were aimed at really more than Harriet. Emma, why is it that they were your enemy? You did want them to marry Harriet.
I did, and they cannot forgive me.
I shall not scold you. I leave you to your own reflection.
You trust me with such flattery? Does my vain spirit ever tell me that I am wrong?
Not your vain spirit, but your serious one. If one leads you wrong, I'm sure the other often tells you of it.
I do own myself to have been completely mistaken, Mr. Elton.
In return for your acknowledgement so much, I do say that you've chosen him better than he chose for himself. Harry Smith has some first-rate qualities which Mrs. Elton is seldom denied. I found Harry more conversible than I expected.
Was that not Dr. Perry who rode by us earlier on horseback? Whatever became of his plan of setting up his carriage? I do not know who had ever set it up. Nay, you both knew of it months ago. Upon my word, I never heard of it till this moment. Then, I must have dreamt it. I am a great dreamer. I dream of everyone at Highbury, or when I am away.
My dear Emma, do you think we perfectly understand the degree of acquaintance between Frank Churchill and Jane Fairfax?
Yes, I do, perfectly. Why do you make a doubt of it?
Have you never had any reason to think that he admired her, or that she admired him?
Never. How could such an idea possibly come into your head?
I had lately imagined that I saw symptoms of passion between them. Certain expressive looks, which I did not believe meant to be public.
Oh, you amuse me excessively. I'm delighted to find that you could let your imagination wander, but it will not do. There is no attachment between them. That is, I presume it to be so on her side, and I can answer for it being so on his. But do tell me the particulars of your suspicions. I want every look described.
No, I will not make sport. Perhaps I am mistaken. In any case, I will say no more.
Come, everyone, you must dance. Emma, set your companions the example. Everybody is lazy, everybody is asleep. I'm ready whenever I want it.
With whom are you going to dance?
With you, if you ask me.
Will you?
Indeed I will. We are not really so much brother and sister as to make them brother.
Brother and sister? No, indeed.
May I have the pleasure of this dance, Mr.
The impertinence of the Eltons had one happy result: the cure of Harriet's infatuation. It seemed as if her eyes were suddenly opened, and she were enabled to see that Mr. Elton was not the superior creature she had believed him. Harriet rational, Frank Churchill not too much in love, and Mr. Knightley not wanting to quarrel. How very happy a summer, Emma thought, must be before her.
Oh, Harriet! My word, she has fainted. Harriet, my dear, what has happened? This woodhouse, it was so frightening. We had taken the Richmond Road. We thought it safe enough. Bless me! Are we no longer safe enough to take the Richmond Road? Who took the Richmond Road, Harriet? Miss Bickerton and I. We were walking out together, and we happened upon a party of gypsies. A fine young man and a lovely young woman thrown together. He, wishing to get the better of his attachment to myself. She, just recovering from her mania for Miss Elton. Extraordinary. But everything must take its natural course. I will not stir a step, nor drop a hint.
After being long favoured hopes with a visit from Mrs. Elton's brother, Mr. Suckling, the Highborough world was obliged to hear that he could not possibly come till autumn. The daily interchange of news was again restricted to the whereabouts of Mrs. Churchill, whose health seemed every day to surprise a report, and the situation of Mrs. Weston, whose health should be eventually increased by the arrival of a child. Mrs. Elton determined everything need not be put off until her brother's arrival, and insisted that they ought to explore the beauties of Box Hill immediately. But first, Mr. Knightley proposed a visit to his own Donwell Abbey to gather the ripening strawberries.
My only objection to gathering strawberries is the stupid, not to mention the glaring sun. I'm tired to death. Come, my dear, we must sit in the shade.
Have you perhaps seen Mr. Churchill pass by?
Charming Mr. Churchill. Why, no, if he had, I'm sure we would have noticed him.
He is so very late.
Perhaps his horse has gone lame.
Yes, that is possible.
And now, my dear Jane, I must tell you my news. I have found you a most desirable situation. I received notice of it only this morning. It is not with Mrs. Bragg as I had formerly hoped, but with a cousin of hers, superior in every way. I am wild to have the offer closed immediately.
Mrs. Elton, I am grateful for your concern, but as I have told you before, I am not at all eager to find a situation just yet.
I will not do your negatives, my dear. I insist on being authorized to write an acquiescence for you by the morrow's post.
And still he does not come. His aunt has contrived to new marriage, no doubt. No, he wrote that his aunt was so much better than him, no doubt getting to us today.
Mr. Knightley, would you be so very kind as to show us the gardens?
The gardens! Yes, I've heard much of them. Knightley, lead the way.
My pleasure. Miss Smith, do you walk on?
Yes, sir. There was a time when Mr. Knight would have scorned Harriet as a companion, but they seemed to was a conversation. Might you be looking for the Robert Martin again? No, that is too old a story. Robert Martin has probably ceased to think of her, and she's behaving extremely well, betraying no emotion at the distressing news of Mr. Churchill's delayed arrival.
And Miss Fairfax, Miss Woodhouse, will you be so kind when I miss as to say that I'm gone home?
Certainly, if you wish it. You are not going to walk the Highbury alone.
Yes, which should harm me? I shall be home in 20 minutes.
Let me over the carriage. You're fatigued already.
Miss Woodhouse, we all know at times what it is to be wearied in spirits. Mine, I confess, are exhausted. The greatest kindness you could show me would be to let me have my own way, and only say that I am gone when it is necessary.
As you wish, then.
Oh, Miss Woodhouse, the comforts of being sometimes alone.
Madness in such weather. Absolute madness. I do pity her. Such a woman indeed. Such an aunt. And the more sensibility she betrays in her horse, the more I shall like her. As for you, Mr. Churchill, Mrs. Weston had been so to let your mare
It
have.
is not the mare that caused my delay, but an increase of illness in my aunt.
I am sorry to hear it.
Had I known how hot a ride I should have and how late I must be, I should not have come at all. Nothing kills me like heat.
You will soon be cooler if you sit still.
As soon as I am cooler, I shall go back again. I would be very ill spared, but such a point had been made of my coming.
Perhaps if you take some refreshment.
No, I'm not hungry. It will only make me hotter. Well, perhaps with some fruit if you have.
I'm glad I've done being well again. I should not like a man who is so soon discomposed by a hot morning. Harriet's sweet temper will not mind it.
As soon as my aunt is well, I shall go abroad. To Switzerland, perhaps. I'm serious, Miss Woodhouse. I am sick of England, and would leave it tomorrow if I could.
You are sick of prosperity and indulgence?
I do not look upon myself as either prosperous nor indulgent. I am thwarted in everything material. I do not consider myself at all a fortunate
join the party, I will.
They had a fine day for Box Hill, but there was much spirit which could not be got over. Emma had never seen Frank Churchill so silent and stupid. He said nothing with hearing, looked without seeing, and listened without knowing what she had said. While he was so dull, it was no wonder that Harriet should be dull likewise, and they were both insufferable. When they all sat down and grew better, Frank Churchill grew talkative and gay, making her his first object.
How much I'm obliged to Miss Woodhouse for telling me to come today. I'm not quite determined to go away again.
Yes, you were very cross, and I did not know what it was about, except that you were too late for the first strawberries.
I was fatigued. The heat overcame me.
It is hotter today.
And not to mind. I'm perfectly comfortable today.
You were comfortable because you were under the mark.
Are you off now?
Yes, I meant so tomorrow. But it is rather too much to be talking nonsense for the entertainment of 7 silent people.
What shall we do to rouse them? Ladies and gentlemen, I am ordered by Miss Woodhouse to say that she desires to know what you are all thinking of.
Is Miss Woodhouse sure she would like to know what we're all thinking of?
It is the sort of thing I should know before myself privileged to inquire into.
Very true, my love. Some ladies say anything. If they are affronted, I will attack them with more address. Ladies and gentlemen, I am ordered by Miss Woodhouse to say that she waives her right of knowing exactly what you may all be thinking of, and only demands from each of you either one thing very clever, 2 things moderately clever, or 3 things very dull indeed, and she engages herself to laugh heartily at them all. There you go.
3 things very dull indeed. That's just for me, you know. I'm sure to say 3 things as soon as I open my mouth, shan't I?
Ma'am, pardon me, but you will be limited as to number. Only 3 at once.
Well, I'll try to hold my tongue. It must have been very disagreeable that she would not have said such a thing to an old friend.
I like your plan, Frank, and will do my best. I am making it my good. Come, sir, let us hear it. Very well. What 2 letters of the alphabet are that express perfection?
What 2 letters? Express perfection. I am sure I do not know.
M and R. You understand? Emma.
This explains the sort of clever thing that is wanted, but perfection should not have come quite so soon.
I protest, I must be excused. I have a great deal of vivacity in my own way, but I really must be allowed to judge when to speak and when to hold my tongue. Pass us if you please, Mr. Churchill. Shall we walk, Mr. E?
Certainly, my love. How well they suit one another. A very lucky Mary and Emily did when they only knew each other a few weeks in Bath. I wonder how many a man has committed himself on a short acquaintance and willed it all the rest of his life.
Hasty attachments do arise, but there is generally time to recover. Only weak, irresolute characters suffer an unfortunate acquaintance to be an oppression forever.
Well, I have so good confidence in my own judgment that when I do marry, I hope somebody should choose my wife for me. Will you find somebody for me, adopt her, educate her,
And make her like myself?
by all means, if you can?
Very well. I undertake the commission. You are a charming wife.
Shall we join Mr. and Mrs. Elton, ma'am?
From my heart, I'm quite ready.
Oh, look, here are the carriages. Come, we must gather together.
How could you be so influenced with Mrs. Bates? Emma, I had not thought it possible.
Nay, how could I help saying what I did? Nobody could. I dare say she did not understand.
I assure you she did.
I know there is not a better creature in the world, but you must allow that what is good and what is ridiculous are most unfortunately blended in her.
But Emma, she is poor. She has sunk from the comfort she's vaunted, and if she lives at old age, must probably think more. For you to laugh at her, humble her, you, whom she has known from an infant, whom she has seen grow up from the time when her notice was honored. Oh, was that begun indeed? This is not pleasant to Emma, and it is far from pleasant to me. But I must tell you the truth that I can.
Emma that her father was felicity to Emma compared to the wretchedness of the morning at Box Hill. As a daughter, Emma hoped that she was not without a heart, and that no one should ever have to say to her, "How could you be so unfeeling towards your father? I must tell you the truth while I can." Emma was just as determined when the morrow came that nothing might prevent her from calling upon Miss Bates.
Oh, Miss Woodhouse, how kind! I suppose you have heard the news and are come to give us joy. This does not seem like much joy indeed. And it would be very trying for us to part with Jane. She's had a dreadful headache just now. Do not think us ungrateful, Miss Woodhouse. It's such good fortune, but poor dear soul. To look at her, nobody would think how delighted she is to have accepted such a situation.
And where is Miss Fairfax going?
To Mrs. Smallridge, to have charge of 3 today.
Mrs. Elton, I suppose, has arranged it?
Yes, good Mrs. Elton. She would not write any denial. And sure enough, yesterday night, we were settled that Jane should go.
You spent the evening, Mrs. Elton?
Yes. She would have us come. Mr. Knightley declined to come first, and Mr. Churchill was called away again. But Jane took Mrs. Elton aside and told her that, upon thinking over her advantages, she was determined to accept the security. Oh, the pianoforte! What is to become of that? To this day, Jane knows not whether it was Colonel Campbell's present or his daughter's.
When is Miss Fairfax to be leaving you?
Within a fortnight, perhaps the worst of it. My mother does not know who is about it.
It must be a severe trial on the board.
So very kind of you, Miss Woodhouse. You are always kind.
There is no bearing such an old.
I would not leave without seeing you, but I have no time to stay. I'm going to London to spend 2 days with John and Miss Bella.
Is this not a sudden scheme?
Yes, rather, I've been thinking of it some little time.
Dear Emma, but the call on Mrs. and Miss Bates.
And you, Emma?
Yes. And are you and I also to be friends again?
Friends, certainly. Well, good morning.
And how did you find Mrs. Bates and her daughter?
They have news. Miss Fairfax is to be going out in a fortnight to be governess to 3 daughters of Miss Smallwood.
Well, I'm glad Miss Fairfax is so comfortably settled. You know, Emma, she is going to be to this new lady who Miss Weston was to us. But I pray she may not be induced to go away and marry after it has been at home for so long.
I know the time one shall never marry.
Oh, this is a new resolution. I hope it is not in compliment to Mr. Elton.
Mr. Elton? Oh no, so superior to Mr. Elton.
Harriet, your expectation of never marrying results from an idea that the person whom you might prefer would be too gracefully superior in situation to ever be with you. Is it not so?
Believe me, Miss Woodhouse, it is not my presumption to suppose. Indeed, I am not mad, but it is my pleasure to admire him from a distance and think of his infinite superiority to the rest of the world.
I'm not surprised.
The service he rendered you is enough to warm my heart. The very recollection of it, his noble look, and my wretchedness from war, in one moment, from perfect misery to perfect happiness.
Let his behavior be the guide for your sensations, Harriet. I give this caution now, because I will never speak to you again on the subject. Let no name ever pass our lips. I'm determined against all interference. He is your superior, no doubt, and there does seem to be obstacles of a very serious nature. Yet no wonderful things have taken place. There have been matches with plenty disparity.
Oh, Miss Woodhouse, thank you.
The following day, an express arrived at Randalls. The great Mrs. Churchill was no more. How her death would affect Frank was among the earliest thoughts of both the Westons. But for now, attention must be shown to Jane Fairfax, whose health seemed, for the moment, completely deranged. Emma ordered a carriage.
Jane could not bear to see anybody. Mrs. Elton indeed could not be denied, and Mrs. Weston said so much. And Mrs. Parry made such a good point, but except them, Jane could really see nobody.
and a route of superior quality was speedily dispatched.
Jane insists she's not at all in want of anything. It can be concluded that Jane is resolved to receive no kindness from me. I am sorry, but at least have the consolation of knowing that my intentions are good.
Could Mr. Knightley have seen into Emma's heart on this occasion, he would have found nothing of reproach. But Mr. Knightley remained in London, unaware that events would soon cut short his stay. One day, about 10 days after Mrs. Churchill's decease, Emma was called to Randalls.
Oh, Emma, my dear Miss Weston, what is it? Frank has been here this very morning on a most extraordinary errand. Oh, what will they say, Emma? What will anybody say? When it has been known that you, Miss Fairfax, have long been engaged.
You are not serious.
There has been a solemn engagement between them ever since October, before either of them came to Highbury. The alliance was formed at Raynham, and kept secret for fear Mrs. Churchill's displeasure. Now that she is gone, oh, my dear Emma, it was our darling wish that we might be attached to each other, and we were persuaded that it was so. And now that we're even feeling on your account, I was saved.
There was a period at the early part of our acquaintance where I was very much disposed to be attached to him, but it did cease. You may believe me, Mrs. Weston, that is the simple truth. But what right had he to come among us with affections engaged, and with manners so very disengaged? How could Jane endure such behaviour?
Your misunderstanding between them, Emma, very possibly arising from impropriety of his conduct.
Impropriety? Oh, Mrs. Weston, it has sunk him, in my opinion. So unlike what a man should be. None of that upright integrity, that strict adherence to truth and principle, which a man should display in every transaction of his life.
Nay, dear Emma, he is men good fortune.
And poor Jane, on the point of paying his government.
He knew nothing about it, Emma. It was the discovery of what she was doing which determined him to come forward at once. Don't let his pieces real. I must love him, and now that I'm satisfied on your account, I make his results me out so well.
Suppose we shall gradually grow reconciled to the idea. And I must congratulate you, my dear Mrs. Weston, on the prospect of having one of the most lovely and accomplished young women in England for your daughter. So, I need no longer be unhappy about Jane Fairfax. She will soon be well and prosperous. And the mystery of the pianoforte was solved at last. That was a boyish prank indeed. Well, I must communicate the painful truth to Harriet as soon as possible. Poor Harriet.
Well, Miss Woodhouse, is this not the oddest piece of news that ever was?
What news do you mean, Harriet?
About Jane Fairfax. I met with Mr. Weston just now, and he told me himself. Jane Fairfax and Mr. Frank Churchill have been privately engaged to one another this long while. Have you any idea of his being in love with her? You perhaps might. You who can see into everybody's hearts.
You seriously ask me, Harriet, whether I imagine him attached to another woman at the very time I was encouraging you to give way to your own feelings?
Me? You do not think I care for Mr. Frank Churchill, do you? Dear Miss Woodhouse, how could you so mistake me?
Mistake you?
I know he proves never name him, but considering his infinite superiority, Mr. Frank Churchill indeed.
Harriet, let us understand each other now. Are you speaking of Mr. Knightley?
I thought you knew. When we talked about him, it was clear as possible.
Not quite. I perfectly remember not wondering at your attachment, considering the service you had rendered to you.
Oh, Miss Woodhouse, it was not gypsies I was thinking of. It's Mr. Knightley's asking me to dance, and Mr. Elton will not stand up with me.
Good heavens! And have you any idea of Mr. Knightley's returning your affections?
Yes, I have been conscious of a difference in his behavior ever since we danced. He has begun talking to me much more than he used to, and in quite a different manner. When we were together at Donwell, he spoke to me in a very particular way indeed. It seemed he was almost asking me whether my affections were engaged.
Is it not possible that you might have been alluding to Mr. Martin?
There was no hint of Mr. Martin. I never thought of Mr. Knightley for anyone but you, Miss Woodhouse. You told me to let his behavior be the rule of mine, and so I have.
Oh, that I left him where I ought, where he told me that I ought. Now that I'm threatened with its loss, I see how much of my happiness has depended on being first with Mr. Knightley. first an interest and affection. I have not deserved it. I've slighted his advice. I've been insensitive to half his merits, but he has still loved me and watched over me from a girl, with an anxiety for my doing right that no other creature has at all shared. I have been universally mistaken. I have done mischief, and I have been totally ignorant of my own heart.
The evening of this day was long and melancholy at Hartfield. A cold rain set in and added what it could to the gloom. The weather affected Mr. Woodhouse, and he could only be kept tolerably comfortable by almost ceaseless attention on his daughter's side. It reminded Emma of the forlorn evening of Mrs. Weston's wedding day, only Mr. Knightley had walked in then and dispelled every melancholy fancy. The prospect before her now seemed threatening to a degree that it could not be dispelled.
Mr. Knightley to be no longer come to Hartfield for seeking comfort. How is it to be endured?
Emma?
You used to hear, Mr. Knightley, now that you are back from London.
You mean Miss Miss Fairfax and Miss Churchill? I've heard them already. I have 3 lines of correspondence from Mr. Weston this morning. At the end of them, they would read the account of what has happened.
You will probably be surprised than any of us, for you had your suspicions. I have not forgotten that you once tried to give me a portion. I wish that I had attended to it.
Time, I mean, you do believe me.
You are very kind, but I am not in want of that sort of compassion. I have acted in a way which I must always be ashamed of, but I have no other reason to regret that I was not one of Mr. Bedelia.
Reason for you to say so much.
My vanity was flattering. I allowed Mr. Churchill's attentions. He is imposed on me, but he has not in.
I've never had high opinion of French Churchill. But he is a fortunate man. He meets with a young woman at a wedding, gains protection. How did he weary her by every treatment? His aunt has moved away. His aunt died. He has used everybody ill. And they all watch to forgive him. And had he and his family thought out the road for his map for him, he could not find his food.
You speak as if you envied him.
In one respect, I do not. Do not ask me what this point is. You are wise, but I cannot be wise. I must tell you to not ask, for I may reach on 7 next morning.
Then, do not speak it. Take some time. Consider. Do not commit yourself.
Thank you.
I am afraid I have stopped in my graciously just now. It gave you pain. If you have any wish to speak openly to me, as a friend, or to ask my opinion of anything you may have in contemplation, I am here to take you up.
As a friend. Very well. I accept your offer and reserve myself to you, as a friend. It was jealousy of French Churchill that sent me to London, but it was too much domestic happiness in my brother's house. Isabella was too much like you. My dearest friend, for dearest you will always be. Tell me then, have I no chance of ever succeeding? Say no to what you said. I cannot let you. If I loved you less, I might be able to talk about it. But you know who I am. You have nothing but truth in it. And I blamed you enough to you. You were born of this and no other woman in England was born. But you understand me. And at present I ask only to hear your voice.
I am your own enemy, Miss Knightley, by hand and by word. But I cannot marry you. When my dear father lives, any change of position must be impossible to me. He could not bear the loss, and I have said that I will not marry.
Bless me! Miss Taylor has been robbed of all of her trophies. Could housebreaking be far off? How are we to protect ourselves?
Papa, might not our safety be better ensured if Miss Knightley were always on the spot?
Why, yes, but how could that be?
And so it was proposed that if Emma were to marry Mr. Knightley, they should all live together at Hartfield. The idea was given, and time and continual repetition must do the rest. Emma would have been too happy, except for...
Poor Harriet. She will forget Miss Knightley, of course, but that cannot be expected to happen very early. It is too much to hope of even Harriet that she be in love with more than 3 men in 1 year. Some time spent in London might give us some amusement. I shall write Isabella immediately.
Indulging in one scheme more, Emma procured an invitation for Harriet. Time passed on, and Mrs. Weston's friends rejoiced in knowing her to be the mother of a little girl. Mr. Robert Martin went to London on business and was asked to dine by John and Isabella Knightley,